Why do people say, huh? Huh? Had a pretty good morning. Got up on time, possibly early. Early? Well, early, yeah, early. My 5 o'clock alarm went off while I was recording my coding session. So that's uploading right now. I don't know how useful it is. There is some conversation in there, but I can summarize most of it right here. This project was adapted from someone else. A lot of the code was just kind of adapted. We intentionally designed it for version 1, and now we're like, but how much version 2 can we really make it, you know? And you know, there's always scope creep. So as things, you're like, well, can it do this? And like, well, not really, but I mean, maybe it could. And then you're like, yeah, let's give it a shot. And then you do it, and then it's like, okay, this adds a little bit of complexity, but that's okay. And then you just start building layers on top of that. And you're just digging yourself deeper into the hole, you know. Of course, it doesn't help that I've learned a lot about programming since I started doing this, and I'm very, very much opposed to the idea of what all the stuff that I did before. I understand the, you know, the requirement. Like, you don't get to be, you know, you don't get to be an academic sitting in a room going, what if, no, let's start over. You know, you still have to deliver, and you still have to deliver more or less on time. Otherwise, customers tend not to remain customers for very long. But as an aside to that, this was a big enough project. Like, I like the project. I just don't like the code that was in the project. So I should have, and this can be a lesson to you, if you, at the point at which you start saying, maybe we should rewrite the whole thing, you've already lost. Like, you need to start rewriting the whole thing. If that's a spark of an idea in your head, you need to fix something. You need to stop what you're doing. You have to go back. So I have this feature that I'm adding, and it's a tiny corner of the website, and it's a feature. It's a little complicated. I had to figure out the architecture for it. And pro tip, you spend a lot more time figuring out the architecture, the more complicated the architecture is. So for as long as you complicate, you're just compounding the interest on your problem. So don't complicate, simplify, unify, you know, functionate. I caught myself this morning. I was, you know, I'm sorry. I have this little corner, this little feature request that I'm doing, and it is and I was adapting code from another section. I'm like, okay, so I do need this, I don't need that, I do want this, I don't want that. Where does this even come from? Where does it go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe? I think I put that in there as a comment. But then I realized that, like, all of this logic was just confusing the crap out of me. Like, there was so much stuff in there that was not clear. And I'm like, this needs to be a function. No, this needs to be a function. And this needs to be a function. And just the logic is just surrounded with layers of cruft, concretions. And I'm just like, no, I'm done. Like, I went through it, and I'm like, does this result in the death of the application, you know, the death of the page, you know, a die function call? If yes, then isolate it, pop it to the front, just leave it there. If this fail condition is met, then die. If this fail condition is met, then die. And those were just at the top. And all of that was, for some reason, nested in different layers. And after I pulled all that out, there was no more nesting. There was just like a regular page that was evaluating the PHP code. It was so much simpler after that. And then after, I have these large blocks of code, I started to realize, and I said this in the stream, I started to realize that I spent so much time, because I do review the streams, I spent so much time hopping around and like trying to figure stuff out. I'm like, well, this points to this, and what does that mean? And I go look it up. Okay, well, that looks like it's referencing this. Okay, what does this mean? And I look that up, and I realized that this is this is like the outcome of object-oriented programming, or bad OOP, I should say. But it's not even OOP. It's just poorly implemented. It's just bad code. It's spaghetti. It's spaghetti. It's spaghetti. It's my code, and it is spaghetti. My code is spaghetti. Okay. Now that we've said that, we can fix it. So, in that realization, I'm like, yeah, I didn't say spaghetti. I didn't realize it, but that was just now. You got to enjoy that. I started to pull things out. I'm like, I'm confused in the logic. Okay, so why am I confused in the logic? Well, there's too much crap here. There's too much stuff. Too much nesting. So I broke out all these other sections and marked them death, because they just cause the page to fail and result in a die command, and then nothing else continues after that. Easy. After that, there's actual working logic. And then that stuff was layered too. And there was multiple, nestings that a couple of them checked the same thing. I'm like, nope. This is the problem with adapting and really just adapting code. See, I should have just, I don't know. There's always a balance, because you're trying to get the product up as quickly as possible. And I guess once the product is up and you have that version 1, then you start working on scaffolding. You start working on functionalizing your code so that it's much easier to work with. It's surface area. So like my logic was spread over a large surface area, even just in sections where I had, text blobs. And there's no reason for that blob to be right in the middle of the logic. I'm a PEP 8 kind of guy. I don't dig on the line length restrictions, but there's no reason for those types of extended definitions to be embedded in the middle of your logic. So just breaking those out into variables, or just calling those, dropping those into local functions, a local function which does nothing except produce a die, a death response. Even just to turn that into a function, like, it's not in the middle of my logic. It's not confusing my logic. I can look one line, skip a line, and then see the next layer of logic, and then figure stuff out. And once I started doing that, that's when I started to realize that all the logical layerings were, or rather the logic was nested and redundant. So once I cleared all that out, it just worked. Everything worked exactly functionally as it did before, but my logic was much more clear. And there were little sections, little imperative sections that weren't really necessary visually. So I popped them out. I made them a function, and some of them were standard enough to drop into the actual function, include file, just so that it's. If you drop it into the include file, every page is going to load it, and there's no reason for every page to load it unless every page needs it, or might need it, or a majority of the pages would need it. I would rather have one, I guess the answer is if you have to put the function in more than one place, then it should probably be in the function include, the function library, I guess you would call it. Yeah, no, that's correct. Because what you're what you're practically trying to do is to not repeat code, and to not have to update things in more than one place. Because when you're updating things in more than one place, you're just having a bad time. You're asking for problems. You're going to change it here and not there, and, you know, it's an extra step that is unnecessary. And if that, you know, extra 12 lines of code gets run on a page that doesn't really need it, then whoop-de-doo. We've got lots of CPU cycles these days. We do not want for CPU cycles. What we want for is clarity. Actually, I'll go left here. You know, in the Commodore 64 days, your code was not clear, but it was fast. And it needed to be unclear in order to be fast. And today, things can be extremely fast, and we're just making them unclear for no reason. So I watched a video recently about Lisp, and he described it as, practically it's not technically that fast, but what you're creating is, since you have the ability in Lisp to create languages, you have the ability to generate things that are more human readable. I don't know how to word this. More a better writing voice, like a literary voice. Closer to prose is probably a good way of putting it. If being able to generate things that are closer to prose, you're turning the computer language into your brain's language, and allowing the computer to handle that level of abstraction or de-abstraction and re-abstraction. You know, it would not be very difficult to metacode something that would write PHP code for you, and then just write it in Lisp. That'd be that'd be sublime. There's a few, like there's lots of stuff I want to break out and put into functions, but there are some things that the PHP syntax simply does not allow, or you have to do, you know, a slight hack in order to make it do that. I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but I tend to shy away from hacks wherever necessary. Plus, if it's not a huge, you know, if it's not a huge hit to your visual understanding of the code, then I'll take it. Like, it's not that big of a deal. But just thinking more functionally and thinking without thinking so that you're avoiding side effects. When you avoid side effects, you almost necessarily code more functionally. Well, you do necessarily code more functionally. Because if you have side effects, then you're making assumptions. And if you're making assumptions, then you're limiting the application of your functions. I was generating some hashes, and I had a salt, and it was technically a global salt, but I put it in the code, I put it in the function, and I was like, oh wait, this is referencing a global variable. That's not cool. That's not functional. So I'll just swap it out. And then as soon as I swapped it out, I was like, well, actually now I can use this for other things. Like, this is what you're supposed to be doing, sir. You're supposed to be writing code that is more reusable, not less reusable. So it doesn't cost much extra to toss a few additional parameters towards a function, but it does cost a lot to write new functions over and over, or make, you know, multiple of the same function that are just a little bit different, in order to save passing a single parameter, or 2 parameters, or 3 parameters. It doesn't really matter. But one of the things was making a table creator that's a bit more extensible. And I thought about it in PHP for a while, and I couldn't quite figure out a good way of doing it. At least not a good way of making it, you know, nice and polymorphic. But in Lisp, that's just like kinda, it's almost automatic. But then the question becomes, you know, how functionally, without homoiconicity, how much can you get closer to that Lisp syntax, not syntax, the Lisp process, where it's easy to iterate across these things through a whole bunch of little functions. How easily can you recreate that in PHP, even with no homoiconicity? I don't know if PHP lends itself well to recursion. That's probably a good thing to check. But I hope this has been somewhat informative. Well, the result of all that was that I was reinvigorated. I was more excited about the project, because when I was done with it, it made a lot more sense. And since I had adapted this code from another spot, I knew I could go back and, it won't be fun, but I will do it. Do that same process so that I can make all this code a lot more clear, and make all the logic a lot more clear, and make all the functions, all the visual cruft, the stuff, it's not cruft technically, the visual obstructions to the code, the things that sit in the middle of my logic that I have to flip over or, work my way around every single time I look at the logic. I can break all that stuff out, and I should. So that's pretty cool. It's exciting. I'm excited about it more. Makes me happy. Makes me happy to see good code, and it makes me happy to know that I am improving. Because it's like I said before, if you don't look at your old code and realize that it was bad, then you're not improving. All right.